The storm was coming. It howled like a beast starving for its prey, the wind carving deep grooves into the snow that had already started to settle on the dirt road. Somewhere in the distance, the weak glow of headlights pierced the darkness. But here, on this isolated stretch of land, there was only the whistling wind and the unrelenting quiet. A sleek, black car sat abandoned at the side of the road, its windows frosted over and its tires half buried under the snow. It looked like it had been left there for days, maybe even weeks, though the snowstorm had only just begun. It was a luxurious vehicle, the kind that people with money drove to flaunt their wealth, but in the stillness of the moment, it seemed utterly out of place, a forgotten relic of a life that had been cast aside. Inside the car, a German shepherd lay curled up in the back seat. Her coat was matted, her body thin, and her ribs showed beneath the fur. She had once been a proud dog, strong and confident, a faithful companion to her owner. But now, she was a shadow of herself, struggling to hold on to the last bits of warmth, the last bits of life, as the snowstorm closed in around her. Her name was Luna. Luna had been left behind by the man she had trusted more than anyone. Her owner, a wealthy businessman, had once been a constant presence in her life, a source of comfort, stability, and even love. But all that had changed one fateful night when everything had crumbled. The man's life had fallen apart. Business deals gone wrong, relationships ruined, his once perfect world shattered. In his desperation, he had decided to leave everything behind, including Luna. He saw her as nothing more than a burden, a reminder of the life he was trying to escape. So, without hesitation, he had driven to this desolate spot, left her inside the car, and walked away without a second thought. Luna's memories of the past played out in fragmented flashes. The long walks through the park, the soft voice of her owner calling her name, the moments of quiet companionship. But now, those memories were all she had left, and they were slipping away with each passing hour. She didn't understand why she had been abandoned. She didn't understand why her owner had disappeared, leaving her to freeze in the cold. All she knew was the hunger gnawing at her stomach, the sharpness of the cold biting into her bones, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that weighed on her heart. But Luna was not the kind of dog to give up easily. She had learned to survive through instinct, to trust in her own strength. Even as the storm intensified and the wind howled louder, she managed to crawl from the back seat to the front, her legs weak but determined. The snow piled higher and higher, drifting over the car, but Luna had no choice but to keep moving, to keep hoping, despite everything. Far down the road, barely visible through the thickening storm, another figure appeared. A man, hunched against the wind, driving his truck slowly through the snow. He had been on the road for hours, delivering supplies to a hospital in a neighboring town. His name was Alex, and his thoughts were as heavy as the snow piling up around him. Alex was a truck driver, accustomed to the endless roads and the solitude they brought. He had never expected to find himself in the middle of a snowstorm so fierce, but there was nothing he could do. The storm had caught him off guard, and now he was just trying to make it through. But as he drove, something caught his eye, a faint reflection of light from the abandoned car. He slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding on the icy road, the tires crunching over the snow. He didn't know why he stopped. It was dangerous to pull over in a storm like this. But something about the car, the way it stood there like a ghost in the wilderness, made him pause. Maybe it was the quiet stillness around it, or maybe it was the feeling that he wasn't meant to pass by. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the truck, the cold air immediately biting into his skin. He had to squint to make out the shape of the car, its dark outline barely visible against the snow. As he approached, his heart began to race. Something was wrong. The windows were fogged, the doors locked, but there was a movement inside. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He tried the door handle, and to his surprise, it opened with a soft click. Inside, the smell of wet fur and desperation hit him. He shone the flashlight around the car, his eyes widening when he saw Luna huddled in the back seat. Her eyes glazed, her body trembling. Her ribs were exposed, her fur dull and dirty. She wasn't moving much, but the slight rise and fall of her chest told Alex that she was alive, just barely. Alex's mind raced, his instincts kicking in. He couldn't just leave her there. He had no idea who the dog belonged to or why she had been abandoned, but he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away. In the back of his mind, Alex wrestled with doubt. His life wasn't simple. He had his own struggles, his own problems. He wasn't sure he was equipped to care for a dog, let alone one in such a condition. He was already overwhelmed by the responsibilities that weighed on him. The last thing he needed was another complication. Yet, the thought of leaving her here alone, in the middle of a snowstorm, was unbearable. Luna lifted her head slightly as he approached, her eyes meeting his for the first time. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope, as if unsure whether to trust him. Alex hesitated, his heart aching at the sight of her. "I won't leave you," he murmured under his breath. "I'll get you out of here." With that, he gently reached out, his fingers brushing against her fur, and for the first time in days, Luna let out a soft whimper. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stir something inside of Alex. He scooped her up carefully, trying not to hurt her fragile body as he carried her back to the warmth of his truck. The storm raged on, but Alex had made his decision. Whatever happened next, he would see this through. Little did they both know, the storm that had begun outside was just the beginning of a much larger storm that would change their lives forever. Alex's truck rattled as he navigated the snow-covered roads, his grip tight on the wheel. Luna lay quietly in the passenger seat, her head resting on a bundle of old blankets he had scavenged from the truck's back compartment. He glanced at her every few seconds, checking her condition. Her breathing was shallow, and her body was still trembling from the cold. The once proud dog seemed so small now, vulnerable, her spirit dimmed by whatever had driven her to this state. The wind outside howled like an angry animal, pushing against the truck as Alex drove with the headlights barely cutting through the storm. The storm was gaining strength, and it felt as if the world itself were pressing in on him. It was a strange kind of solitude, one that was different from the loneliness he was used to. This was a new kind of quiet, one filled with tension, responsibility, and fear for a creature that had been abandoned in the harshest of elements. His mind drifted back to the moment when he had found Luna, the stark image of her in that car. It had been a scene he wouldn't forget. The thin, trembling dog, the empty, lonely car, the desperate look in her eyes as if she knew she was about to be forgotten. But Alex wasn't about to forget her. Something deep inside him had clicked in that moment, and he couldn't walk away. Yet, as he looked down at her now, Alex was reminded of the many uncertainties he was facing. His life wasn't easy. He had a daughter at home who was sick, a pile of bills stacking up, and a future that felt more like a fog than a clear path. Helping this dog wasn't part of his plan. It wasn't the right time. But then, another thought crept in. Maybe it was the perfect time. Maybe he needed this. A way to feel useful again. A way to forget about all the mess that had taken over his life. Maybe this was his chance to make a difference, to be part of something good, even if it was just for this one dog. He glanced over at Luna again. She seemed to sense his gaze, lifting her head weakly to look at him. Her eyes met his, weary but trusting. There was a moment of silence between them, but it was a silence that spoke louder than words. "I'm not going to let you down," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the wind. They reached Alex's small, cluttered home a few hours later, and he carefully carried Luna into the warmth of the house. The storm had escalated, the snow piling up outside like a blanket over the world. The wind howled louder, and the cold crept through every crack in the walls. But inside, the heat of the old furnace offered some semblance of comfort. Alex knew he had to act fast, but he wasn't prepared for the reality of what he had just taken on. Luna was no longer shivering quite as violently, but her condition was still critical. Her ribs were visible, her body frail and weak. Alex set her down on the couch, wrapping her in a blanket as he frantically searched for something to help. He had never been much of a pet owner. His life had been too unpredictable for any real commitment. But now, this wasn't just about providing warmth. It was about saving a life. His daughter, Emily, was in her room, and Alex hadn't yet told her what had happened. He wasn't sure how to explain it to her. How could he tell her that a dog had been abandoned, left to freeze, with no one to care for it? How could he tell her that this creature, whose life had been so recklessly discarded, was now relying on them for survival? Alex's phone buzzed on the counter, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing as he saw a notification. A social media post, a photo of the abandoned car. The post was from a local news outlet, and the caption read, "A luxury car abandoned on the outskirts of town. Authorities are investigating." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized how much attention the car had already attracted. He was about to swipe away the notification when another alert popped up. A picture of Luna, or what looked like her, from the same post. The comments section was filled with people questioning the owner, expressing outrage, and demanding answers. A wave of discomfort washed over him. This was bigger than he had thought. His decision to rescue Luna wasn't just a personal act of kindness. It was already turning into something else. People were talking, and the media was involved. Luna was no longer just a lost dog in the storm. She was a symbol now, an emblem of cruelty, of abandonment, of injustice. Back at his truck, Alex had noticed something else. A small tag on Luna's collar. The name Jasper was engraved on it. At first, he hadn't paid much attention. But now, with the storm raging around him and his home suddenly filled with new weight, the significance of that name hit him. Jasper, the name of the dog's owner. As the hours passed, Luna's condition slowly improved, though her eyes remained haunted by the remnants of whatever had driven her owner to discard her. She would occasionally lift her head, staring at the door as if waiting for something. Alex had seen that look before, in the eyes of people who had been let down by life. People who had given up, but still clung to the hope that someone, somewhere, would come back for them. But Luna's owner wasn't coming back. Alex could feel it in his gut. And as much as he knew he could never replace the love Luna had once known, he felt a responsibility now, not just for her survival, but for her dignity. She deserved more than to be just a story on the news. She deserved to be seen for what she was. A living, breathing soul, deserving of kindness and compassion. The next morning, when Alex stepped outside to check on the snowstorm's aftermath, he noticed something strange. Car had pulled into the driveway. It wasn't his own truck. It was a sleek black sedan, almost identical to the one he had seen earlier in the storm. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he walked toward the car, his thoughts racing. Had someone come to claim Luna? Had they come for answers? As he approached the car, the door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, looking lost and anxious. His face was familiar. The man had been everywhere: news, business circles, social media. Alex's stomach twisted as recognition hit him. The owner, Jasper. Jasper stood there, his hands trembling as he adjusted his coat against the biting wind. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't the confident businessman Alex had seen in photos. This man looked like a shell of himself. And yet, even in his disheveled state, there was an aura of wealth about him, something Alex couldn't ignore. It was the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to still expect the world to bend to his will, despite the wreckage in his life. For a moment, the two men stood facing each other, neither speaking. Alex could see the guilt in Jasper's eyes, the panic he was trying to suppress. Luna, who had been lying quietly on the couch, now perked up at the sound of voices. She lifted her head slowly, her gaze meeting Alex's as if asking him what was happening. You found her," Jasper's voice cracked, breaking the silence. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Luna, but he didn't seem to know what to do with himself. His gaze darted nervously from Alex to the truck, then back to Luna, who was now staring at him with wide, wary eyes. Alex said nothing at first, watching the man carefully. He had no intention of letting this go. There was something deeply unsettling about Jasper's presence here, as if he believed he could waltz in, claim Luna, and walk away without consequence. But Alex had made a promise to the dog. Luna's life wasn't a commodity to be traded away on a whim. He wasn't about to let Jasper walk away with her again. "Who are you?" Alex asked, his voice firm but not without a hint of confusion. "What's going on here?" Jasper hesitated. His lips pressed together, and for a moment, Alex saw a flicker of something. Anger, perhaps, or shame. Cross his features before he quickly masked it. I'm the one who left her," he muttered, his eyes briefly glancing at the ground. She was my dog, but I couldn't handle her anymore. She was too much." Alex clenched his jaw. His fingers curled into fists, but he kept his voice calm. "You left her to die in the middle of a snowstorm, and now you're here, what? To take her back? Just like that?" Jasper's eyes flickered with guilt, but there was also a trace of defensiveness. "I didn't leave her to die," he said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. I didn't know what to do. Everything fell apart. My life, it's all falling apart. I couldn't take care of her anymore. She was a reminder of a past I couldn't live with." Alex stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. The man's words were jumbled, an incoherent mess of excuses. There was no acknowledgement of the pain and fear Luna had suffered, no understanding of what he had done. "So you just leave her? Abandon her like trash? Because your life's falling apart?" Alex's voice was low but sharp. "That's how you deal with things?" Jasper seemed to shrink under Alex's gaze, his posture crumbling as he avoided eye contact. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he murmured. I thought it would be better this way." Alex felt a surge of anger rise in him, but he swallowed it back. There was something else behind Jasper's words, something more insidious. He was still trying to justify his actions, still trying to make it sound like he had made a decision out of necessity, out of some twisted form of compassion. But there was no excuse for abandoning a living creature in a storm, for leaving it to fend for itself when it depended on you. Luna's low whimper from inside the house interrupted Alex's thoughts. She was slowly moving toward the door now, her body still fragile, but her instincts were guiding her. She had heard her owner's voice. She had recognized him. Alex stepped aside, blocking the doorway, refusing to let Jasper pass.
"No.
You don't get to just waltz in here after everything you've done. You don't get to pretend it didn't matter." Jasper opened his mouth to protest, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. His eyes flickered with a mix of guilt, shame, and fear. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Alex's gaze for long. I never wanted her to suffer," Jasper said, almost pleading. "She was a good dog. He paused, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I just didn't know how to deal with everything. I didn't know how to deal with myself anymore." Alex stood silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the man. There was no mistaking it. Jasper was broken. But his brokenness didn't absolve him of what he had done. Luna's life had been a casualty of his own emotional collapse, and that was something Alex couldn't forgive. "Whatever you think you feel right now," Alex said finally, his voice calm but unwavering, "it doesn't change what you did. You left her to die, and you can't undo that." Luna, hearing the conversation from behind the door, whined again. Alex felt his chest tighten, a wave of empathy flooding through him. Despite everything, despite the abandonment, despite the trauma, Luna still remembered her owner. She still hoped, somewhere deep inside, that he would come back for her. But that hope was a lie. The man standing in front of Alex wasn't the person she needed anymore. He had already made his choice. Jasper took a step back, his shoulders sagging under the weight of Alex's words. The guilt was obvious now, etched into his features like a brand. I never meant to hurt her," he whispered, almost to himself. "Then why did you?" Alex asked, the words like a lash. "Why?" Jasper didn't answer. He simply turned and walked back toward his car, leaving Alex standing in the doorway, the storm still raging outside. Alex watched him go, his heart heavy with disgust and disbelief. But just as he was about to close the door, he heard Luna's soft whine from behind him. She had approached cautiously, her body still weak, but her eyes full of longing. Alex crouched down to her level, gently lifting her head. "He's not coming back for you, Luna," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "But I am." And as the storm continued to rage outside, Alex knew that this was only the beginning of something much larger. The road ahead would be hard, both for him and for Luna, but there was no turning back now. The days that followed were a whirlwind, not just for Alex and Luna, but for everyone involved. What had started as a quiet rescue in the midst of a snowstorm was rapidly growing into something much bigger. A story that would capture the hearts of people far beyond the small town where it had begun. Alex had tried to keep Luna's presence in his life as quiet as possible, focusing on her recovery, taking her to the vet, and doing everything he could to help her heal. Her ribs were still visible, her energy low, but there was a spark in her eyes that wasn't there before. It was as though she had already begun to trust him, to understand that he wouldn't abandon her the way her previous owner had. But that trust came slowly, one small gesture at a time. When Alex fed her, when he cleaned her wounds, when he simply sat next to her and let her know that she was safe. However, the media had other plans. Word spread quickly about the abandoned dog and the luxury car left in the middle of a storm. Photos of Luna, bruised and frail, circulated on social media, sparking outrage. People were horrified that anyone could be so heartless as to leave an animal to die in such conditions. But as more details emerged, the story took on a new level of significance. The discovery of Jasper's identity was like the spark that ignited a firestorm. The first reports about Jasper had been tentative. His name hadn't been revealed at first, but people were already beginning to speculate. Then came the breaking news. The wealthy businessman, the man behind the abandoned car, had been identified as Jasper Harrington, a name that carried weight in the business world, a name associated with opulence, power, and success. The man who had seemingly lost everything was now the subject of a public outcry, and his life would never be the same. It didn't take long for the backlash to grow. Social media was flooded with posts condemning Jasper's actions, demanding justice for Luna. Hashtags like #JusticeForLuna and #StopAnimalAbandonment trended nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, and people rallied together in anger and disbelief. For many, the idea that someone could treat an animal with such cruelty was unfathomable. Meanwhile, Luna's story began to take on a life of its own. The little dog, once left to die in the freezing cold, was now the face of a movement. People from all over the country reached out to Alex, offering donations for Luna's medical bills, pledging support, and asking for updates. The online community embraced her, watching her recovery closely and offering messages of hope and love. But Alex had mixed feelings about the sudden attention. He hadn't asked for any of it. He wasn't interested in being thrust into the spotlight. His concern was, and always had been, Luna. But the movement that was growing around her could not be ignored. It was clear that this wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about something much larger, the treatment of animals, the consequences of neglect, and the idea that people who had wealth and power could get away with cruelty. One evening, as Alex sat in his living room with Luna curled up beside him, the phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw the name of a local reporter flashing across it. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of him and he picked up. "Hello, Mr. Harper?" The voice on the other end was smooth, confident. "This is Rachel Donovan from the local news station. We've been covering the story of Luna, and we were wondering if you'd be willing to speak about your experience. There's a lot of interest in this, and we think your perspective would be important to share." Alex sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. He hadn't been ready for this. He didn't want to be part of some media circus, but he also knew that the truth about Jasper's abandonment needed to be told. "I'm not really comfortable with all the attention," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just rescued the dog. I don't need the spotlight." "I understand," Rachel said, her tone softening. "But Luna's story is inspiring so many people. She's already become a symbol of resilience, and your role in saving her is something the public wants to hear about. We'd like to give you the chance to share Luna's recovery and the message behind it. We want people to understand what happened here, and we think your voice could make a difference." Alex hesitated again, staring at the floor. He could feel Luna's presence beside him, her warmth and quiet strength giving him the courage he needed. He had always been a man who kept to himself, who shied away from attention. But Luna had changed things. The truth needed to be heard, and maybe this was the way to make sure Jasper didn't get away with what he had done. "All right," Alex said, finally giving in. "I'll speak with you, but only about Luna. That's the important part." The interview was arranged for the next day. Rachel came to Alex's home with a camera crew in tow. The storm outside had died down, leaving the world blanketed in white, quiet snow. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the soft hum of the heater and the sound of Luna's quiet breathing. She was doing better, but she still needed care. Rachel's questions were straightforward, her approach professional. But the weight of the situation hung over them both. Alex spoke about Luna's condition when he first found her, the emotional impact it had on him, and how he had felt when he realized the depths of the betrayal she had endured. He spoke about Jasper, too, though he didn't go into the details of their confrontation. He simply stated that the man's actions were unforgivable and that Luna deserved better. As the interview ended, Rachel promised that the story would reach even more people. She thanked Alex for his time and left, but not before telling him how much of an impact his decision to save Luna had already had. The following day, the broadcast aired. The report was emotional, with footage of Luna's journey from a sickly, abandoned animal to a recovering survivor. It showed Alex's dedication to her care, his quiet resolve to make sure she never had to face abandonment again. It also highlighted the public outcry surrounding Jasper's actions, painting him as the villain in a story that had captivated the nation. And just as Alex had feared, the consequences for Jasper were swift and severe. He had been flooded with demands for accountability. Legal action was being considered, and protests were being organized outside his corporate offices. His reputation, built over years of high-profile business deals, was in shambles. His face was no longer associated with power and success but with cruelty and disregard for life. But none of this mattered to Alex, who was more concerned about Luna's future. The story had taken on a life of its own, and as the days passed, he realized that Luna's journey had already changed him, too. He had learned that, even in the darkest moments, there could be a glimmer of hope. He had given Luna a chance, and in return, she had given him something invaluable. A reminder that kindness could still triumph over cruelty, and that love, in whatever form it took, was always worth fighting for. And so, as the public's outrage simmered and the storm clouds finally began to lift, Alex knew that his own storm was far from over. But he also knew that as long as he had Luna by his side, he could face whatever came next. The weeks that followed Luna's recovery were filled with a quiet determination. While the public outcry over Jasper's actions had slowly faded from the headlines, it had left a mark on the community. People still spoke about it, but now they spoke of it with a sense of hope rather than anger. Luna, once a symbol of abandonment, had become a symbol of resilience, of second chances. She was healing, physically, emotionally, and so was Alex, though in ways he hadn't fully expected. The bond between him and Luna had grown into something deep, something unspoken yet understood. He no longer saw her just as a dog he had rescued from a storm. She was a companion, a partner in a journey that neither of them had anticipated. Her presence in his life had brought him a kind of peace, one that he had been searching for ever since his own life had unraveled. Alex wasn't the same man he had been before Luna came into his life. The weight of his responsibilities, his daughter's health struggles, his financial worries, his own personal doubts, hadn't disappeared, but they no longer consumed him the way they had. Luna had a way of grounding him, of forcing him to slow down and be present. And, in turn, Alex was determined to be the person she needed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the orange light poured through the windows, Alex sat on the porch with Luna by his side. She was resting her head on his knee, her body no longer frail and weak but strong and healthy. Her coat had regained its luster, and her eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now shone with a quiet trust. A car pulled into the driveway, breaking the peace of the moment. Alex looked up and saw a familiar face, Rachel Donovan from the local news station. She stepped out of her car, her camera crew in tow. But this time, there was no rush, no urgency. Her expression was different, more relaxed, as if she had come for a visit rather than an interview. "Hey, Alex," she greeted him warmly. "I just wanted to check in on you and Luna. I heard she's doing well." Alex stood and nodded, gesturing for her to join him on the porch. "Yeah, she's doing great. We're getting through it. It's been a lot to process, you know?" Rachel smiled as she approached, glancing at Luna with affection. "I understand, but I have to say you've done an incredible job with her. The community's still buzzing about it. People are just so inspired by what you did. And Luna, she's become a symbol. You've given people hope." Alex looked down at Luna, who had risen and trotted over to greet Rachel, her tail wagging gently. He scratched her behind the ears, his heart swelling. He didn't know how to respond to the praise. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, he had simply done what felt right. "I didn't do it for the recognition," he said quietly. "I did it because she needed someone." "I know," Rachel said. "But it's more than that, Alex. You gave her a second chance, and in doing so, you've inspired others to act. You've made people see that even in the worst circumstances, there's still good in the world. And that's something worth celebrating." Alex looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Rachel hesitated for a moment before continuing, her voice soft but earnest. "The story, Alex, has become more than just a local news piece. It's become a movement. People are now speaking out more about animal abuse, about neglect, and about the consequences for those who harm them. It sparked some real change. And it's all because you didn't turn away from Luna." Alex shook his head, trying to absorb the weight of her words. He wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't expected any of this. But as Rachel continued, he began to realize that his choice to help Luna had rippled outward, touching lives he hadn't even known existed. "Luna's story is being shared across the country," Rachel added. "There's a bill being proposed in the state legislature that would increase penalties for animal cruelty. And it's all because of the attention Luna's story has garnered. People are standing up and saying enough is enough." Alex's chest tightened at the thought. It was overwhelming, in a way he hadn't anticipated. His quiet life had been completely upended, but in the best possible way. Luna had become a catalyst for change, for something larger than either of them. As Rachel and her crew set up their cameras, Alex stood and looked out over the yard, feeling a strange sense of peace settling over him. Luna had come into his life as an abandoned creature, a victim of circumstance, but she had given him something in return that he hadn't even known he needed: purpose. In the weeks that followed, the movement for justice gained momentum. Protesters rallied in front of Jasper's offices, demanding that he be held accountable for his actions. Public outcry grew louder, with celebrities and public figures voicing their support for stricter laws regarding animal welfare. Jasper's company began to feel the financial and social repercussions of his cruelty, and legal proceedings were initiated. But it wasn't just Jasper who faced consequences. The entire community began to reevaluate how it treated its animals. Shelters were overwhelmed with donations, and new programs aimed at preventing animal cruelty were set into motion. The local government took action, putting resources toward better monitoring of animal care facilities and harsher penalties for those found guilty of neglect. Through it all, Luna remained a constant. She had become a beacon of hope, not only for the cause she had inadvertently sparked but also for Alex. She had given him a reason to hope again, to believe that even in the darkest moments, there was still a chance for something good. One day, as Alex sat on the porch with Luna, watching the sun set over the quiet town, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had both come. He had started this journey simply trying to save a dog, but in doing so, he had found a new sense of purpose. Luna had been abandoned by someone who didn't understand the power of love and loyalty, but she had found a new family, one that would never let her down. "Hey, Luna," Alex murmured, scratching her ears as she lay contentedly at his feet. We made it through, didn't we? Together. Luna lifted her head and met his gaze, her eyes filled with trust and affection. In that moment, Alex understood what true redemption looked like. Not just for her, but for himself. They had both endured their own storms, but now the future seemed full of possibility. A new beginning, forged from pain, but shaped by love. And as the wind calmed and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Alex knew that the journey wasn't over. Not for him, not for Luna, and not for the world that was beginning to change, one act of kindness at a time.